All right, Brandy, thanks so much for doing this. My first question that I have for you is, tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how you started in the mental health space.
Yeah, so thank you for having me. I am a licensed marriage family therapist, so LMFT for short. Been in the field for a little over 10 years now. And gosh, how to get started. I think it's just wanting to find a way to be helpful, be supportive. I think I didn't even really know what like therapy was back in the day. It's not like it was as publicized as it is now. And I think too, just wanting to have a career that aligned with my values and wanting to give back and help people. And so I think that's ultimately led me into that path.
Who was sort of that sort of role model that sort of helped you get into mental health? Was there like a teacher? Was there like some sort of mentor that you looked up to say, "Hey, I want to be like this person one day"?
Oh man, that's such a good question. I think probably not like a specific person. I think just feeling like I was always this like go-to person with friends or being the mediator with my family, kind of being the person that wanted to make sure everything was okay for people, wanting to hear everyone's perspective, wanting to make sure things didn't get jumbled up. And I think too, realizing like, oh, it's not just a degree in psychology, but also human services, that there's a lot of counseling components. And so I think a lot of my professors in that part of my degree shared a lot of their experiences with therapy, counseling, social work, case management. And so I think the for those experiences, I think that is really what fueled me into realizing like I'm going to go into this field. Because I think before I just was going to get my degree in business and didn't really have too much of a direction, but I knew like that's what I wanted to do. And so I definitely shifted it up in college.
Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit about the work that you do now. What sorts of things do you do in your role as a mental health professional?
Yeah, so at this point in my career, I do a lot of individual therapy with adults and some couples therapy. So primarily, I think it's very popular like cognitive behavioral therapy, helping people challenge disordered thinking, changing up behaviors, changing up patterns, and things like that. And then the primary groups that I'm now specializing in working with, people with OCD, people with ADHD, lots of people with postpartum, fertility issues, fertility struggles, just I think being the source of support for some of these more um, marginalized communities and just more like particular um, challenges. I think there's less therapists that have more specific specialties. And I know for myself, I wanted to, because we're doing online therapy now, you have this ability to have access to somebody all over California, not just somebody who lives 5 minutes away. And so I think by specializing in more specific backgrounds, I um I think I was feeling more fulfilled too. And I think too, realizing, right, like how can we help these folks? There's a lot of different accommodations and things that they need or support, right, when it comes to like school stuff or things with work or different referrals, connecting with different mental health professionals, right? So like a lot of the work is, are we ruling out other things? Are we connecting with their primary doctor? Are we giving them a referral to a psychiatrist, a psychologist, right? If it's testing for ADHD. And I think too, just wanting to be that conduit of, hey, like this could be your first step where you haven't reached out to anybody ever. But if there is more that maybe I'm seeing, I definitely want to get those referrals to those clients and some resources and get them connected.
Mm-hmm. What's it like working with that particular population, the OCD and the ADHD population? What have you sort of learned in working with them?
Yeah, I think with OCD, I'll start with OCD. I think too, it's very misunderstood, I think, by a lot of people that are don't know as much about the community. And so I think I tend to, right, I want to be a safe space for these folks, right? Because sometimes they're coming in and they don't even realize that that is, in fact, maybe what they have, right? We want to do an assessment, want to be thorough, really educate them on like, what does that mean? What is an obsession? What is a compulsion? How does this impact somebody? What might they be avoiding in their life? And then I really want clients to feel comfortable, to feel safe. And so walking them through like what this process might look like, how long it may or may not take, and what the commitment might be, because I think there's a lot of fear specifically with OCD, right? Because there's a lot of fear of like something bad happening to me or something bad happening to someone else. And that stems a lot of the obsessions and can translate into a lot of ways where I like to use the phrase like making my life smaller. And I think with ADHD, right, it's not just about strategies of like, oh, hey, let's get more organized, like let's break up this pattern or like let's be more accountable. Because I think when specifically if someone's already diagnosed and they're just looking for additional support with therapy, it's not like, hey, I just need to make this goal and like go clean up my room. I think there's so many more layers to that because it's like, well, let's really break down and understand why. Like, there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of embarrassment, guilt, and I think just wanting to be a safe space for that and figure out like what are our goals? Like, are our goals to if it's procrastinating less, it's not just like, hey, do this and like let's talk about it next week. Like really working through what does that mean? What does that change look like? I like to use like who are my supportive people in my life? Who is another person I can share maybe this diagnosis or my goal with, right? Because therapy is only once a week for 50-ish minutes. So who else can be supporting me in my journey each week through this? How else can I be accountable? So I think with those two groups primarily, there is like a lot of more of like a direct plan, but I am not the person who's like, hey, you have to do it this way. This is what's happening. It's more of like, this is the process. Let me hold that for you. But I want to be in the passenger seat along the journey with you so you're not alone in this.
Mm-hmm. And so how do you help those populations work through the struggles that they have? What sorts of modalities do you use?
Yeah, I think so. There are definitely different strategies when it comes to like specifically OCD and ADHD, right? I think depending on what someone's functional impairment is, right? If they're struggling with work or they're struggling with school, you know, do we need some sort of accommodation just in general? So sometimes it might even start with that, right? If there's a test someone hasn't been able to pass, or there's certain, right? Like there's all different kinds of accommodation requests of different schools, different tests, different jobs, different scenarios, living situations. And so I think making sure someone feels supported in that, right? If there's, an emotional support animal letter or something that they're needing where they just cannot go anywhere without having a panic attack or something pretty severe, which inhibits their ability to live their life. And then I think also, right, with accommodations with school or work or testing, being very specific of like, how is this going to help somebody have the same equitable experience as someone else who maybe doesn't maybe need as much time or like being fearful, fainting, or panicking in the middle of of a test or whatnot? Or does that mean a separate room? Does that mean more time? Or does that mean a modified instruction? I used to work with a lot of children and teens earlier in my career, and so right, this was like working directly in the schools, directly with teachers, directly with parents. So there was a lot of collaboration happening. And I think as far as you mentioned, like what kind of modalities, the type of therapy that's kind of like the gold standard for OCD is a lot of the times is exposure response and prevention therapy. So we really have to talk about like after we do this assessment together, I like to use the phrase like see where the cards fall for us. We're going to make this roadmap for us and figure out like what are my primary things that I'm scared of or what's the primary thing that's driving my behavior or making me avoid something. And that's where we kind of create this almost like we're like assigning like a numeric value as far as like one is not so scary and 10 is like this is like the worst thing ever. And slowly exposing someone and creating goals together, right? Or sometimes I'll use the phrase like, what's our mini challenge for this week? So I think that that's really helpful, breaking it down, giving someone accountability. We're working together. And so that's part of the exposure part. Response, like how did they experience that challenge? We talk about it the next week. Prevention, like what are ways we're going to keep this progress going? There are other categories that somebody is noticing that are getting worse. And so I think that's typically the process as far as like working with OCD. I think ADHD is a little different, right? Because there's certainly things that that person might be avoiding or they might be struggling with, not necessarily multitasking, but prioritizing. And so a lot of time management strategies, figuring out like what's actually important, what's actually urgent, how are we breaking things down smaller? How are we making things look less scary? Because I think when someone has this giant list of all these things that they've been putting off and avoiding, it's really easy to shut down. And so I think when it comes to ADHD, it's really about creating a better system, a system that's going to work for them. And it's going to look different for everybody. And so I always want to be mindful of I'm not going to teach a system that's not accessible, costs a lot of money. It's like some app somewhere that you have to buy or use. It's got to be something that this is free. This is available to you. This is what works for you. And it's going to be different for everyone. And that
Mm-hmm.
right, we're held accountable because therapy's every week. So we can modify it if it's not working.
Mm-hmm. And what have you learned in doing this kind of work? Is there anything that you, as a mental health professional, that you learned in working with these folks? Like, oh, I never thought about this. I've learned something new, you know?
Oh my gosh, I think I learn things new like every time I get to work with somebody new. I think just because like we've got this diagnostic manual, this big purple book that therapists will lean on for diagnosing purposes, insurance purposes, but there's so much more than just like, do they meet these 5 out of 7 criteria? And so like being able to, I think just since doing more online therapy, the opportunity to work with anybody in California, right? There's a lot of different experiences somebody has in Northern California or Southern California, or just even different areas where I'm located. Previously, I was only able to see people that live within 20 minutes of me. And so I think just being able to tap into a much more diverse community, that alone, I think, has made me a better therapist, right? Because I get to see and hear and experience, right, lots of different cultures, lots of different views, belief systems, all different types of ages and whatnot. And so I think that has really challenged me all kinds of different times because there's not one way to think or be. And there's going to be times where you're not a great fit for a client. And I think being able to navigate that conversation and feel comfortable, like encouraging someone, right? Therapy is an important process where you feel safe and being able to refer them to the next person, or maybe we're on the pathway of being one or two or three or four people that help this person. So I think that's been like one of the biggest things I've learned since primarily going fully into online and private practice. But I think also there is so many subsets of OCD or ADHD, like where it looks different in every person. One person's fear might be X, Y, and Z. This person's might be over here. And although kind of thinking of OCD, the exposure response prevention is the same plan of attack, so to speak, it's going to look different. And so I think recognizing like just recognizing, I think, right, this book of like what you think you were taught in school or training is great as far as like giving you kind of like structure, but there's so much more with someone's specific concerns. So I think just being able to adapt, be flexible, and throughout the plan, sometimes start over, reset, and not, I think it's really easy to take it personal or like feel worried or question yourself. And um, I think it also would be strange if we didn't do that, right? Because it is kind of scary meeting all kinds of different people and hoping that you're going to help them.
Mm-hmm. And is there something that you want to learn in terms of something new? I couldn't help but notice that you have a stack of books right
Oh
next to
yeah.
you.
Yeah. I always have like my rotating stack of books of like the ones on top over here are the ones I either am going to reread or haven't read yet. And so I think I'm I'm constantly trying to like further develop as far as like with OCD, there's a lot of information out there. And so lots of trainings with that, lots of books on anxiety, attachment style. I think those tend to be the things I gravitate towards. But I think when there's something new that, right, like for instance, I do also work with couples and right, like feeling seeing this need more of like a lot of people are going through IVF treatments, having fertility concerns. And so I think, right, not that this is necessarily a specialty or a mental health diagnosis, but somebody who has distress and is depressed or has a lot of anxiety because they're going through this. And so that has been my latest focus as far as educating myself and making sure, right? I know I'm not a doctor, I'm not someone's OBGYN, or their other medical professional, but it's like where we can all get connected and work together. And so I think I've really focused on making sure I try to know as much as possible about the process of something, the process of like someone going through treatments or things like that, so that I can be informed and also be able to hold space for someone when they are going through a struggle that they feel like they're alone. So I think I'm always trying to dive deeper and make sure I am staying current because it's not like you just do one training and then you're done and you're just, you know it all. It's evolving constantly.
And so for finally for the folks that are wanting to enter the mental health field and learn about ADHD, OCD, what sorts of tips, advice, even book recommendations even would you um give them, to look into?
Yeah, I think there's like a couple answers here, right? Because it I think what's really a struggle a lot of times is people they want therapy and they're like, where do I start? How do I get a therapist? And a lot of answers have been like, oh, just go back to your insurance. And it could be helpful. Where do we start? I think people have mentioned things like, oh, go to Psychology Today, right? That's to me, that's like the Facebook of the therapist index, right? All of us have a Psychology Today profile, psychologytoday.com. But I think what happens is like we get stuck there because we're looking at all these profiles and we're emailing providers, oh, I think I'm going to connect with this person. And then they never hear anything back. And so for me, I really like to give them platforms, right? There is platforms where they can just go right onto the platform. They can see the next appointment. They can book it. They can put their insurance in, right? There's platforms like Headway.co, Rula.com. There's Alma, um, Grow Therapy. So there's certainly like probably 50 more platforms than what I just named. But I think just like even knowing which platforms to direct somebody to, where it's like, oh, well, if I have Kaiser insurance, oh, okay, well, a lot of people don't take that one. So here's this platform. That's a great one for Kaiser. Or, right, if they've got TRICARE or if they've got Medicare. Because I think sometimes there are barriers to treatment. And so I always like if someone's like, I want therapy, for me, those are my first questions. Like if I'm helping a family or a friend, or if a client's asking me questions to help maybe one of their friends, I always want to kind of make sure that my ability to get them connected to somebody that's going to work for them. And as far as like you mentioned, like resources, oh my gosh, like there's so many books. And so that would be so hard to just like narrow it down. But I think for me, I'm like a big podcast person. So I love that this is what you do. But I think, right, like there's a podcast that speaks to someone where they feel connected. There's definitely several for OCD. I'm trying to think of the one off the top of my head. I think it's called Purely OCD. That was a really great one. Just like breaking down things, helping educate people. I think with books, it really depends on what the person is coming in with because it's not like I'll just go to, oh, like, let me find my first ADHD book. A lot of times it'll be like, okay, let's talk about boundaries, right? I think Dr. Henry Cloud has a great book on boundaries, right? There's books on communication styles, trying to figure out like what's my style. There's learning more about yourself, right? There's books on habits. Atomic Habits by James Clear is a great one. And then there's books on like even just understanding our attachment style. Um, the book Attached, the name is slipping from me at the moment, but so sometimes like I will start with things more like that about understanding yourself versus just like always going right to OCD or ADHD. So I think there's so much about that and what it does for us or how it impacts us or what does it look like for me. So that's usually what I tend to do. I mean, I think the amount of resources is like infinite, but that could be overwhelming. And so wanting to just focus on really getting that person specifically what they need.
Yeah, and also like I've noticed I talked to this mental health professional the other day, and she said that she has a social media account where she talks about, medical sort of um uh, terminology, treatments, that kind of thing. So from your end, do you have like a social media account dedicated to like OCD, ADHD content, or is that something you want to do on the horizon, or?
That's definitely something I'm thinking about as far as the future, as far as like education and tips. Right now I don't. I think I'm really focusing more on like building my practice and just kind of really honing in on using a lot of my time meeting with clients specifically. But definitely, I think in the future, I think, right, there's so much of the future with podcasting now and being able to hear a lot of these medical professionals, mental health professionals, lawyers, like all these people in their field, and then hearing them share things. And we don't really get to spend that much time with our medical professionals in our lives. And so I do think that is going to be an invaluable resource as far as like things to look for, how to get started, wait, tips and tricks. And so definitely something I am thinking about in the future. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Alrighty.